false memory. You're on the witness stand. The lawyer asks if you saw the defendant's blue jacket that night. You pause. Blue jacket. Yes. You remember it now. Dark blue, navy. You can see it clearly. You testify under oath. The defendant is convicted. There was no blue jacket. The lawyer planted that detail in the question. Your brain filled in the rest, built a memory, made it real. False memory. A recollection of something that never happened. Not a glitch. This is how memory works. Your brain doesn't record like a camera. It reconstructs. Every single time you remember, it pulls fragments, fills gaps, smooths inconsistencies. New details slip in. They feel as real as anything you actually experienced. Memory isn't storage, it's creation. Every time you recall something, your brain rebuilds it from pieces scattered across different regions. Emotion, location, sequence, all stored separately. When you remember, your brain pulls these fragments together and weaves a story. But here's the problem. Your brain can't always tell the difference between what happened and what should have happened. Someone suggests a detail, even subtly. Your brain treats it like any other information, integrates it, stores it. Next time you recall that memory, the suggested detail is there. Your brain smooths everything into a coherent story. The false detail doesn't feel foreign. It feels like it was always there. This happens all the time. A family dinner. Everyone remembers the same vacation differently. One person swears it was July. Another insists August. Someone remembers a restaurant that didn't exist on that trip. Each person is absolutely certain. Because once the false detail gets in, it reinforces every time you recall it. The memory becomes more vivid, more detailed, more real. Even as it drifts further from what actually happened. Relationships collapse over this. You remember your partner saying something cruel. They have no memory of it. You're both certain. You could both be wrong. Memory doesn't care about accuracy. It cares about coherence. If adding or changing a detail makes the story make sense, your brain does it. No permission needed. Courtrooms get this catastrophically wrong. Eyewitness testimony is treated as gold. But witnesses confidently remember things that never occurred. A leading question. A photograph shown before testimony. The way a lawyer phrases something. These implant details that weren't there. Once implanted, they're indistinguishable from real memories. The witness isn't lying. They genuinely believe it. Their brain made it true. Your memory isn't a recording. It's a story your brain tells itself. And like any story, it changes with every telling. Misinformation effect. Two cars collide at an intersection. You saw it. Later, police ask questions. How fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? You think back, pretty fast. 40, maybe 50 miles per hour. You tell them. A week passes, they ask again. This time you remember broken glass everywhere. Shattered across the pavement, you can picture it clearly. You mention it in your statement. There was no broken glass, the cars barely dented. And that word, smashed, made you remember the crash as worse than it was. One word, it altered what you saw. Misinformation effect. When information you hear after an event contaminates the original memory. It doesn't just change details, it overwrites them. Once the new information gets in, separating what you actually saw from what you were told becomes nearly impossible. You experience something, your brain encodes it. The encoding is incomplete, gaps exist. Later, you hear new information. From a news report, from someone else who was there, from how a question is phrased. Your brain doesn't flag this as separate. It blends it with the original memory, fills the gaps. Next time you recall the event, the misinformation is woven in. You don't remember being told. You remember it happening. Frighteningly easy to trigger. Show people a video of a car accident. Ask half, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Ask the other half, how fast when they smashed? The word smashed makes people estimate higher speeds. A week later, those who heard smashed report seeing broken glass that wasn't there. The word didn't just change their answer. It rewrote their memory. This happens constantly. You witness something at work. A colleague tells you what they saw. Their version has details yours didn't. After hearing it, you start remembering those details too. Not because you're weak, because that's how memory functions. It absorbs new information, integrates it. Doesn't matter where it came from. Media does this at scale. Breaking news reports wrong details in the first hour. Corrections come later. Millions already encoded the original version. Months later, they remember the false details, not the correction. The misinformation became the memory. Therapy does it. A therapist suggests certain childhood experiences might explain current problems. The patient searches for answers, begins to remember events that never occurred, not inventing things. The suggestion gives their brain a framework, a structure to build a memory around. Once built, that memory feels identical to real ones. Relationships poison themselves this way. You argue with someone. Later, a friend asks what happened. You tell your version. In the telling, you add emphasis, interpret motives, fill gaps. Your friend's reaction, their questions, their validation, all feed back. Next time you recall the argument, you're not remembering the original event. You're remembering the story you told, reinforced, solidified. Misinformation doesn't require malice, doesn't require intention, just exposure to new information afterward. Memory is reconstruction, not playback. Every new piece becomes part of the original. You can't rewind to the pure version. It's contaminated. Your brain can't show you which parts are real and which came later. Cryptomnesia. You're writing. The idea flows naturally. A perfect metaphor, an elegant turn of phrase. It feels original, completely yours. You finish the piece, proud of what you created. Someone reads it. "This is brilliant," they say. "Where did you get this from?" You didn't get it from anywhere. You created it. Except you didn't. Months ago, you read something similar. You don't remember reading it. The memory faded, but the idea stayed buried. When you sat down to write, your brain offered it up as inspiration. Not as something you read, as something you thought of. The line between what you created and what you absorbed disappeared completely. Cryptomnesia, unconscious plagiarism, when you mistake someone else's idea for your own original thought. Not theft, not intentional copying. A memory malfunction that makes borrowed material feel like personal creation. Your brain stores ideas without always tagging the source. You read something, hear something, see something. The content gets encoded, but the context, where it came from, fades faster. Later, when that idea surfaces, your brain presents it as available material. It doesn't come with a label saying, "Read this in a book 2 years ago." It just appears feeling fresh and new. This happens most when the gap between exposure and recall is long. The original encounter gets forgotten, but the content persists. Time erodes the memory of reading or hearing it, while the idea itself remains intact. When it resurfaces, there's no competing memory to contradict the feeling that you just thought of it yourself. Musicians experience this constantly. A melody comes to them, feels completely original. They build a song around it. Only later, sometimes after release, someone points out it's nearly identical to an existing track. The musician has no memory of hearing the original, but they must have. The brain doesn't generate melodies from nothing. It recombines what it's been exposed to. Sometimes the recombination is so minimal that the source material comes through almost unchanged. Writers, artists, designers, anyone working in creative fields gets caught in this. You pitch an idea in a meeting, it lands well. Days later, you realize a colleague mentioned something similar weeks ago. You didn't steal it. You genuinely forgot they said it. Your brain filed it away, then served it back as original insight. Relationships fracture over this. You share an idea with your partner, they don't engage. Months later, they present the same idea as their own breakthrough. You accuse them of taking credit, they're genuinely confused. They have no memory of you saying it first. To them, it's a fresh thought. Both perspectives are real. The memory exists in one mind, absent in the other. The tricky part is confidence. When cryptomnesia happens, you don't feel uncertain about the idea's origin. You feel certain, because your brain is presenting it as yours. There's no nagging doubt, no sense of familiarity that might make you question it. The lack of source memory creates the illusion of originality. You can't always trust what feels like your own thinking. Some of it is. Some of it is reconstruction. And your brain won't tell you the difference. Déjà vu. You walk into a restaurant you've never been to before. The layout, the lighting, the smell of coffee, it all feels intensely familiar. Not just familiar. You've been here. You know this place. Except you haven't. You've never set foot in this building. But the certainty doesn't fade. For a few seconds, maybe longer, you're convinced this moment already happened. Déjà vu, the overwhelming sensation that you're experiencing something you've already experienced. It's not a vague similarity. It's precise, absolute familiarity in a situation you know is entirely new. About 2/3 of people experience this at least once. Some more frequently. It hits without warning, lasts seconds, then dissolves. While it's happening, the feeling is unshakable. This exact moment, this configuration of details, you've lived through it before. The mechanism is a timing glitch. Your brain processes experience in layers. Visual information, spatial layout, emotional context. They all feed into different regions before being integrated into conscious awareness. Normally, this happens seamlessly. But occasionally, one pathway processes faster than the others. The brain receives the same information twice, microseconds apart through different neural routes. The second signal feels like a repeat, like you've already seen this moment. Another explanation involves memory encoding errors. Your brain might accidentally flag a new experience as familiar during the encoding process itself. Instead of marking it as new information, it gets tagged as retrieved memory. You're experiencing something for the first time, but your brain is treating it like recall. The contradiction creates that eerie sense of repetition. Stress and fatigue make it more likely. When you're mentally drained, your brain's timing mechanisms get sloppy. Signals misfire, processing delays. The smooth integration of sensory input breaks down, and déjà vu slips through. Certain neurological conditions trigger it more frequently. Epilepsy, particularly temporal lobe epilepsy, causes persistent déjà vu in some patients. For them, it's not an occasional oddity. It's chronic, intrusive, sometimes lasting minutes. The feeling of familiarity becomes a constant background hum, disconnecting them from the present. But for most people, it's harmless. Disconcerting but brief. What makes it unsettling isn't the sensation itself, it's the certainty. While it's happening, you're not wondering if you've been here before. You know you have, even though you also know, logically, that you haven't. The two certainties exist simultaneously, and neither budges. Some people interpret déjà vu as evidence of past lives, prophetic dreams, or parallel realities. The brain glitch gets mystified because the experience feels too precise to be random. But precision doesn't mean significance. Your brain can generate intensely detailed false signals. Déjà vu is just one of them. When it happens, the best response is to wait. It fades on its own. Fighting it or trying to figure out why doesn't help. Your brain misfired. The moment will pass. And then you'll be back to experiencing things the normal way, once as they actually happen. Jamais vu. You're typing an email. You write the word door, D-O-R. You pause. You look at again, door. The spelling is correct. You know the spelling is correct. But the word looks wrong. It looks like nonsense. 4 letters that don't belong together. You write it again, door. Still wrong. The more you stare, the stranger it becomes. This is jamais vu, the opposite of déjà vu. A sudden loss of familiarity with something you know extremely well. Not forgetting the word, not losing the meaning is intact. You know what a door is. But the word itself, the shape of it, feels completely alien. It usually happens with repetition. You say a word over and over, write it multiple times, stare at it too long. At some point, your brain's recognition system overloads. The familiarity signal shuts down. What should feel automatic suddenly requires conscious effort. And once that effort kicks in, the automatic feeling doesn't return. Common in everyday moments, you write your own name. You've written it thousands of times, but today, for no clear reason, it looks unfamiliar. The letters seem arbitrary. You double-check the spelling even though you know it's right. The disconnect is brief but absolute. For those few seconds, your own name is a stranger. Happens with faces too. You see someone you know well, a friend, a family member. Their face looks off, not different, not distorted, just unfamiliar. You recognize them logically, you know who they are. But the gut-level recognition, the immediate warmth of familiarity, is missing. They look like a well-rendered photograph of themselves, accurate but hollow. The mechanism involves semantic satiation. When you repeat something too much, the neurons responsible for recognizing it become temporarily fatigued. They stop firing as strongly. The recognition pathway weakens. What normally happens instantly, below conscious awareness, now requires deliberate processing. and deliberate processing doesn't generate the same feeling of familiarity that automatic recognition does. Musicians encounter this during practice. You play the same passage repeatedly. At some point, it stops sounding like music. The notes are correct, but they feel mechanical, disconnected. The fluency is gone. You're hitting the right keys, but the phrase has lost its meaning. You have to stop, reset. Come back later for the familiarity to return. Jamais can be unsettling when it happens with something deeply personal. Your own voice on a recording, your handwriting, your reflection. The thing you're most familiar with suddenly feels like an imitation. You know it's you, but the recognition is intellectual, not felt. Unlike Déjà vu, which feels mysterious, Jamais feels broken. Something that should work effortlessly isn't working. The smoothness of recognition is replaced by conscious analysis. And once you're analyzing, you can't go back to just knowing. The familiarity has to rebuild on its own. It fades, usually within seconds or minutes. The fatigued neural pathway recovers. The recognition signal strengthens. And the word, the face, the sound snaps back into familiarity, like it was never strange at all. Source monitoring error. You're in an argument. Your partner insists you promised something. You have no memory of promising it. They're certain. You're certain you didn't. One of you is wrong. But which one? You both remember the conversation. You both remember the context. The only thing you disagree on is who said what. Source monitoring error. When your brain remembers the information but misattributes where it came from. You remember the content of a conversation, a piece of advice, a warning. But you can't accurately recall who said it, where you heard it, or whether you thought of it yourself. Your brain stores memory content separately from source information. The what gets encoded in one region. The where, when, and who gets encoded in another. When you recall something, both pieces are supposed to come together. But the source tag is weaker. It decays faster. Over time, you're left with the memory itself, detached from its origin. This makes memories feel interchangeable. You remember hearing that a certain restaurant has great desserts. Was it a friend's recommendation? An online review? Something you read in passing? The information is clear. The source is fog. Your brain guesses. And often, it guesses wrong. Relationships weaponize this. You remember your partner being dismissive about your work stress. They insist they were supportive, and it was you who downplayed it. Both memories are real. Both feel certain. But at least one is misattributed. The emotion is accurate. The words might be accurate, but who said them has been scrambled. Media compounds it. You read a headline. Later, you remember the claim but forget the source. Was it a credible outlet, a random blog, a satirical post? The information persists without the context. You repeat it as fact, unaware that the source was questionable or non-existent. Children are especially vulnerable. Ask a child where they learned something. They often can't say. They know the information, they don't know how it got there. This makes them susceptible to suggestion. Tell a child something happened, then ask them about it later. They'll remember it happening, but they'll misattribute the memory to direct experience rather than your suggestion. Therapy can exploit this unintentionally. A therapist suggests a possible explanation for a patient's feelings. The patient considers it. Weeks later, the patient remembers having that realization on their own. The idea came from the therapist, but the source tag faded. Now it feels like personal insight. The patient isn't lying. They genuinely believe they reached that conclusion independently. The problem gets worse with repetition. Every time you recall a memory, you have a chance to re-encode it. And during re-encoding, the source information can shift. You remember hearing something from a trusted friend. Next time you recall it, the source might blur. Eventually, you might remember it as something you always knew, rather than something you were told. Dreams scramble this further. You dream about a conversation. The content feels real. Days later, you remember the conversation but forget it was a dream. You confront someone about what they said. They have no idea what you're talking about, because they never said it. You dreamed it. But the source tag is gone, and the memory feels identical to real experience. Source monitoring errors don't just confuse where information came from. They create false certainty. You're not uncertain about who said what. You're confident. And that confidence makes you resistant to correction. Even when someone tells you they didn't say something, your memory insists they did. The brain doesn't archive sources reliably. It archives content. And when you pull up that content, the brain fills in the blanks. Sometimes accurately, often not, but always with conviction. Memory conformity. You witnessed a robbery. 3 of you saw it happen. Police bring you in separately. The first witness describes the suspect wearing a red jacket. The second confirms it. Red jacket, definitely. By the time they get to you, you're second-guessing yourself. Was it red? You thought it was blue. But 2 people already said red. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe the lighting threw you off. You tell the officer red. Red jacket. It wasn't red. You were right the first time. But you changed your answer to match the group. Memory conformity. When your memory shifts to align with what others remember. Not peer pressure. Not conscious agreement. An automatic adjustment your brain makes when other people's versions conflict with yours. You genuinely start remembering it their way. The moment you hear someone else's account, your brain treats it as new information about the same event. It doesn't keep the 2 versions separate. It blends them. If their details are confident and specific, your brain weighs them heavily, especially if they spoke first, especially if there's more than one of them. The memory recalibrates. What you saw gets mixed with what they said they saw, and over time you can't tell which parts were originally yours. Groups create false consensus this way. A family remembers a holiday. One person describes an argument that happened. Others don't recall it, but they don't contradict, they listen. The description is detailed, emotional, convincing. Days later, they start remembering the argument too. Not because it happened, because the story was vivid enough to merge with their actual memories of that trip. Couples do this constantly. You remember a conversation going one way. Your partner remembers it differently. You discuss it. Their version is specific. Yours is hazier. You start adopting elements of theirs, not to keep the peace, because their certainty makes you doubt your own recollection. Eventually, you remember a hybrid. Part what happened, part what they said happened. Neither of you remembers accurately anymore. The courtroom magnifies this. Witnesses talk to each other before testifying. They compare notes, align their stories. By the time they're on the stand, their memories have synchronized. They genuinely believe they all saw the same thing, but what they're recalling is a negotiated version, a blend. The compromise feels like the truth because everyone agrees. Consensus becomes evidence. But consensus isn't accuracy. Children are especially vulnerable. Ask a group of kids what happened on the playground. One child gives a detailed account. The others listen. When you ask them individually later, they repeat elements from the first child's story. They're not copying. They're remembering. The other child's version infiltrated their memory of the event. Now it's part of their own experience. This happens even when the other person wasn't there. You tell a friend about something that happened to you. Your friend listens, asks questions, offers their interpretation. Later, you recall the event. Parts of their interpretation are now in your memory. You're remembering your experience filtered through their perspective, and you can't separate the two. Memory conformity doesn't require agreement. It just requires exposure to someone else's version. Once you hear it, your brain starts integrating it. The original memory isn't erased. It's rewritten. And the rewrite feels more certain than the original ever did. Imagination inflation. A therapist asks if you ever got lost in a mall as a child. You don't remember getting lost, but they ask you to imagine it. What would it have felt like? How scared would you have been? Who might have found you? You play along. Picture yourself wandering between stores, calling for your parents, someone in a uniform guiding you back. A few weeks later, the therapist asks again. Suddenly, the memory feels less imaginary. You're not sure if you actually remember it or just imagined it so many times that it started feeling real. The line blurs, and eventually you recall getting lost in a mall as a child. Clearly. Vividly. Even though it never happened. Imagination inflation. When imagining an event makes you more confident that it actually occurred. The more you picture something, the more real it starts to feel. Imagination leaves the same kind of memory trace as actual experience. Your brain doesn't mark imagined events with a special tag. They're stored the same way. And if you imagine something repeatedly, The memory strengthens just like a real memory would. The effect is strongest when the imagined event is plausible. You're not going to start believing you flew to the moon, but getting lost as a child. That's believable. Your brain fills in details based on what's realistic. The more details you add, the more concrete the memory becomes. It stops feeling like imagination and starts feeling like recall. Therapy stumbles into this accidentally. A patient is asked to visualize possible childhood experiences that might explain current anxiety. The visualization is meant to be exploratory, but repeated visualization turns it into memory. The patient starts recalling these events as real. They describe them with emotion, with specifics. They're not lying, they genuinely believe it happened. The imagined scenario has been encoded as fact. This works in reverse too. You imagine yourself doing something you've never done. Skydiving, giving a speech, confronting someone. The more you imagine it, the more familiar it feels. Later, if someone asks if you've done it, there's a moment of confusion. Did you actually do it, or just imagine it so vividly that it feels like you did? The brain doesn't always distinguish clearly. Marketing exploits this, and it asks you to imagine using a product. Picture yourself on that vacation, driving that car, wearing those shoes. The more vividly you imagine it, the more likely you are to believe you want it, or that you've already wanted it for a long time. Imagination creates a sense of prior experience, even when there wasn't one. False confessions rely on this. An interrogator asks a suspect to imagine how the crime might have happened. Just hypothetically, if you did it, how would it have gone? The suspect imagines it, walks through the scenario. The more they imagine, the more the scenario feels possible, then probable, then real. By the end, they're not sure anymore whether they imagined it or did it. The confession isn't a lie, it's confusion. Imagination made the event feel like memory. The problem is confidence. When you imagine something repeatedly, you don't just start thinking it might have happened. You start feeling certain it did. The imagined memory doesn't come with doubt. It comes with the same conviction as real memory. And there's no internal signal telling you it's fake. Imagination is powerful, but it's not harmless. Every time you vividly picture something that didn't happen, you're building a memory. And once that memory exists, your brain treats it like any other. Real or imagined, it all gets stored the same way. Flashbulb memory. You remember exactly where you were when you heard the news. The room, the time of day, who was with you, what you were wearing. The memory is sharp, detailed, preserved like a photograph. It feels more real than most of your other memories, more accurate. You could describe that moment perfectly even years later, except you probably can't. Flashbulb memories feel vivid, but vivid doesn't mean accurate. When something emotionally significant happens, your brain encodes it with intense clarity. The shock, the emotion, the sensory details, everything gets stamped in. It feels like the memory is locked, permanent, reliable. But it's not. It degrades just like any other memory. You just don't realize it's degrading because the confidence stays intact. Studies confirm this. Researchers ask people to describe where they were during a major event, a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, a public tragedy. They record the answers immediately after it happens. Then they ask again months or years later. The details change, locations shift, times get fuzzy. People who were there in the original account disappear in later versions. But the confidence doesn't drop. People insist their memory is perfect, crystal clear. They're wrong. The vividness creates the illusion of accuracy. Because the memory feels so detailed, you assume it must be correct. But detail and correctness aren't the same thing. Your brain fills in gaps with plausible information. It smooths inconsistencies. Every time you recall the event, you reinforce the current version, not the original one. The memory becomes more confident and less accurate simultaneously. This happens with personal milestones too. Your wedding day, the birth of a child, a major accident. You remember these events with absolute clarity, or so you think. But if you compare your account with photos, videos, or other people's memories, discrepancies appear. You remember things that didn't happen. You forget things that did. The emotional weight of the event made you certain the memory was locked in. It wasn't. The brain prioritizes emotion over precision. When something shocking happens, your stress response activates. Adrenaline floods your system. Your brain interprets this as a signal that the moment is important, worth remembering, so it encodes aggressively. But aggressive encoding doesn't mean perfect encoding. It means intense encoding. And intensity doesn't protect against distortion. Collective flashbulb memories create cultural myths. Everyone remembers where they were during a historic event. But when researchers compare accounts, they find widespread inconsistencies. People confidently describe details that didn't happen, timelines that don't match, locations that weren't possible. The shared emotional experience makes everyone feel like they have perfect recall. They don't. They have synchronized distortion. Even the term is misleading. Flashbulb suggests a photograph, a frozen accurate capture. But memory doesn't work that way. There's no snapshot, just reconstruction. Every time you remember a flashbulb moment, you're rebuilding it from fragments. And each rebuild introduces small changes. Over time, the memory drifts, but the vividness stays, so you trust it completely. The worst part is how certain you feel. Flashbulb memories don't come with doubt. They come with conviction. You remember it perfectly. You'd swear to it. And that certainty makes you immune to correction. Even when evidence contradicts your memory, you reject the evidence. Because the memory feels too clear to be wrong. It is wrong. Vividness is not accuracy. Confidence is not proof. An emotion, as powerful as it is, doesn't protect memory from decay. Repressed memory. Something terrible happens. So terrible that your mind can't process it, can't hold it. The memory gets pushed down, buried so deep that you have no conscious access to it. You live your life unaware. No recollection, no flashbacks, nothing. Years pass, decades, and then suddenly the memory surfaces, fully formed, detailed. You remember what happened, you remember who did it. You remember everything. This is the theory of repressed memory. That trauma can be so overwhelming, the mind locks it away as a defense mechanism. And later, under the right conditions, it comes back. The problem is, there's almost no reliable evidence that this actually happens. Memory doesn't work like a vault. You can't store something intact and retrieve it later unchanged. Memory is reconstruction. If something isn't being remembered, it's not sitting in storage waiting to be unlocked. It's fragmentary, decayed, or never fully encoded in the first place. The idea that a complete, detailed memory can be repressed for decades and then recovered perfectly contradicts what we know about how memory functions. Trauma does affect memory, but not by hiding it. Trauma often makes memories intrusive. People with PTSD don't forget what happened to them. They can't stop remembering. The memories are persistent, vivid, overwhelming. The brain doesn't protect you from trauma by erasing it. It does the opposite. It encodes it aggressively, sometimes too aggressively. The concept of repressed memory became widespread in certain therapeutic settings. Patients would come in with vague symptoms, depression, anxiety, relationship problems. A therapist might suggest that these could stem from childhood trauma the patient doesn't remember. The therapist would guide the patient through visualization, hypnosis, or repeated questioning. And eventually, the patient would recover a memory, often of abuse, often detailed, often believed completely. But these memories are frequently false, not intentionally false. The patient isn't lying, but the memory was constructed during therapy, not recovered. The therapist's suggestions, the patient's imagination, the social pressure to explain their suffering, all of these combine to create a memory that feels real. Imagination inflation, source monitoring errors, misinformation effect, all working together to build something that never happened. Families have been destroyed by this. Patients recover memories of abuse by parents or relatives. Confrontations follow, relationships end. Legal action gets taken. Years later, evidence emerges that the abuse never occurred. The memory was implanted, not maliciously, but through therapeutic techniques that didn't account for how easily memory can be distorted. This doesn't mean all abuse memories are false. Real trauma happens. Real abuse occurs. And people who experienced it often remember it clearly. Too clearly. The issue is with the idea that trauma can be completely forgotten and then perfectly remembered later. That specific mechanism, repression and recovery, doesn't have solid scientific support. When someone genuinely doesn't remember a traumatic event, it's usually because they were too young, the event wasn't encoded clearly, or the memory has degraded over time like any other memory, not because it was actively suppressed. And when a recovered memory emerges in therapy, especially under suggestive conditions, it should be treated with extreme caution, because the brain can create detailed, emotionally charged memories of events that never happened, and the person experiencing those memories will believe them completely. Repressed memory as a concept sounds protective, like the mind is shielding you from pain. But memory doesn't shield, it distorts, fragments, and reconstructs. And when therapists, patients, or legal systems treat recovered memories as reliable evidence, the consequences can be devastating for everyone involved. Recovered memory. You don't remember much from early childhood. That's normal. Childhood amnesia affects everyone. But then in therapy or through guided meditation, you start remembering things. Specific events, details, abuse, trauma. Things you had no access to before. The memories come back with force. You can see them clearly now, feel the emotions. You've recovered what was lost. Or so you think. Recovered memory is different from spontaneous recall. Spontaneous recall happens when something triggers a memory you haven't thought about in years. A smell, a song, a place. The memory was always accessible, just not actively recalled. Recovered memory, on the other hand, refers to memories that supposedly emerge after being completely inaccessible, often through therapeutic techniques designed to bring them up. The distinction matters because the methods used to recover memories are the same methods that create false ones. Guided imagery, hypnosis, repeated questioning, dream analysis. All of these can implant memories rather than retrieve them. The patient believes they're uncovering the past, but they're often constructing it. Here's how it happens. A therapist suggests that certain symptoms, anxiety, depression, relationship issues, might be explained by repressed trauma. The patient doesn't remember any trauma. The therapist says that's normal. The mind hides it. They begin exercises to access the hidden memories. The patient imagines possible scenarios, visualizes what might have happened. Over time, these visualizations feel less hypothetical. They start feeling real eventually. The patient recalls them as actual events. This isn't unique to therapy. It can happen in support groups, through self-help books, or even in casual conversations where someone suggests a possible explanation for your struggles. Once the idea is planted, your brain starts working with it, building a narrative, filling in details. And because memory is reconstructive, the brain doesn't distinguish between building and remembering. It all feels the same. The danger is the certainty. People who recover memories don't feel uncertain about them. They feel absolutely sure. The memories are vivid, emotional, detailed. They carry the same psychological weight as verified trauma. The person isn't pretending. They genuinely believe what they're remembering is real. And challenging those memories feels like dismissing their pain. But belief doesn't equal truth. Memory researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that false memories can be implanted with surprising ease. People can be made to remember getting lost as children, being attacked by animals, committing crimes, all through suggestion and imagination. The memories feel identical to real ones. There's no internal marker that says, this is false. The brain encodes them the same way. Legal cases have hinged on recovered memories. Convictions have been made, later overturned when evidence proved the abuse never occurred. Families torn apart, lives destroyed, not because anyone was malicious, but because the mechanisms that create false memories were mistaken for the mechanisms that retrieve real ones. This doesn't mean recovered memories are always false. Some people do recall traumatic events they hadn't thought about in years. But those memories usually come back spontaneously, triggered by something in the environment, not through guided retrieval techniques. And they're often fragmentary, not fully detailed narratives. When a memory emerges only through therapeutic intervention, especially when the therapist actively encourages the patient to visualize or imagine possible trauma, skepticism is warranted, not dismissal. Skepticism, because the brain doesn't store memories in a locked vault waiting to be opened. It reconstructs them every time, and reconstruction is vulnerable to suggestion, imagination, and distortion. Recovered memory feels like discovery, but often it's creation, and the line between the two is invisible to the person experiencing it. Reconsolidation. You have a memory, it's stable, fixed, you've recalled it many times, the details are consistent, then something happens. You remember it again, but this time in a different context. New information gets added, a different perspective, an updated interpretation. The next time you recall that memory, it's changed, not replaced, modified. The original is gone. You're remembering the updated version now, and you don't realize it's shifted. Reconsolidation. The process by which memories become unstable every time you recall them, vulnerable to change, and then restored in an altered form. Every act of remembering is also an act of rewriting. Here's the mechanism. Memories aren't static files. When you recall something, your brain temporarily destabilizes it. The memory becomes fragile, malleable. During this window, new information can be integrated. Emotions can be added or removed. Details can shift. Then the memory gets re-encoded, reconsolidated, with the new elements now part of it. The original version is overwritten. You're not remembering the event anymore. You're remembering the last time you remembered it. This happens constantly. You recall a conversation. While recalling it, you're also thinking about what you wish you'd said. That thought gets woven into the memory. Next time you remember the conversation, your wished-for response feels like part of what actually happened. You didn't mean to change it. But reconsolidation doesn't ask permission. Therapy uses this deliberately. Trauma memories can be altered during reconsolidation. A therapist guides a patient to recall a traumatic event while introducing new, less threatening associations. The memory is destabilized. The new associations get integrated. When the memory reconsolidates, it's less distressing. The event didn't change, but the emotional charge attached to it did. The reconsolidated version is easier to live with. But reconsolidation isn't always therapeutic. Sometimes it's destructive. You recall a happy memory, but you're in a bad mood, or someone makes a critical comment about that time. The negativity gets incorporated. The memory reconsolidates with a darker tone. What used to feel joyful now feels bittersweet. Or hollow. You didn't lose the memory, you corrupted it. Relationships shift this way. You remember the early days with your partner. Initially, those memories were warm, but the relationship soared. Now when you recall those moments, bitterness seeps in. You start remembering warning signs that weren't there. Red flags you ignored. The memories reconsolidate with your current perspective. You genuinely believe you saw the problems from the start. You didn't. You're rewriting the past to match the present. This is why eyewitness testimony degrades over time. Every time a witness recalls the event, they're reconsolidating it. If they've been asked leading questions, watched news coverage, or talked to other witnesses, those influences get incorporated. The memory doesn't just fade, it transforms. The witness isn't lying. They're remembering the reconsolidated version, which is now further from the truth than the original ever was. Even positive reconsolidation has risks. You recall a neutral memory repeatedly in a positive context. The memory reconsolidates as positive. Later, you trust that memory more than you should. You make decisions based on it. But the positivity was added afterward. The original event wasn't as good as you now remember. Reconsolidation rewrote it, and you have no way of knowing. The frightening part is the seamlessness. Reconsolidation doesn't feel like editing. It feels like remembering. You don't notice the shifts. You don't catch the changes. Each version feels like the original, because your brain has no way to compare the current memory with the previous one. The previous one is gone. Overwritten. This means every memory you has been reconsolidated multiple times. None of them are pure. None of them are untouched. Every recall is a rewrite, and the more you remember something, the further it drifts from what actually happened. You're not preserving the memory by thinking about it. You're altering it, slowly, irreversibly, without ever realizing it's happening. Eyewitness memory. The witness takes the stand. They saw the crime. They're confident. They point to the defendant. That's him, I'm certain. The jury listens. Eyewitness testimony is powerful, direct, human. Someone was there. They saw it happen. They remember. How could that be wrong? Easily. Eyewitness memory is one of the least reliable forms of evidence. Not because witnesses lie. Because memory doesn't work the way people think it does. Witnesses genuinely believe what they're saying. They're certain, but certainty and accuracy are not the same thing. Stress distorts encoding. When a crime happens, adrenaline floods the system. The witness is terrified. Their brain prioritizes survival over observation. Details get lost, the face blurs, the sequence scrambles. What gets encoded is fragmented, incomplete. But later, when recalling the event, the brain fills in the gaps, smooths the story, creates a coherent narrative. The witness doesn't realize they're remembering a reconstruction, not a recording. Time makes it worse. Memory degrades. Details fade. But confidence doesn't. The witness recalls the event multiple times. Each recall is a reconsolidation. New information gets integrated, leading questions from police, media coverage, other witnesses' accounts. All of this seeps into the memory. The original experience gets buried under layers of suggestion. By the time the witness testifies, what they're recalling is a blend. Part observation, part imagination, part contamination. Cross-racial identification is especially unreliable. People are worse at recognizing faces from other racial groups. The brain encodes faces differently depending on familiarity with that group. A witness confident in their identification might be identifying the wrong person simply because their brain didn't code the features accurately in the first place. The confidence is real. The accuracy isn't. Lineups compound the problem. A witness sees a lineup. They assume the perpetrator is in it, so they pick someone. Even if no one looks exactly right, they choose the closest match. That person becomes the memory. The brain latches onto the chosen face. Future recalls reinforce it. The witness becomes more certain over time, not less. But they might have identified the wrong person from the start. Decades of wrongful convictions prove this. DNA evidence has exonerated people who were convicted based on eyewitness testimony. Witnesses who swore under oath that they saw the defendant commit the crime. They weren't lying. They genuinely remembered it that way. But their memory was wrong, and in some cases, catastrophically wrong. The legal system treats eyewitness testimony as gold. Juries trust it. But memory researchers know better. A confident witness is not necessarily an accurate witness, and a detailed account is not necessarily a true account. Memory is reconstruction. Stress, time, suggestion, all of these warp it. What feels like certainty is often just the brain's ability to create a convincing story. Eyewitness memory isn't evidence, it's a guess, dressed up as fact. Weapon focus effect. A man walks into a store, he's holding a gun. The clerk freezes. Eyes locked on the weapon, the barrel, the trigger. Everything else fades. The man's face, his clothes, his height, none of it registers. Just the gun. Seconds later, he's gone. Police arrive, they ask for a description. The clerk struggles. They remember the gun perfectly. Everything else is a blur. Weapon focus effect. When a weapon is present, attention narrows. The brain fixates on the threat. Everything else, faces, surroundings, context, gets deprioritized. You remember the weapon. You forget the person holding it. The mechanism is survival. Your brain detects danger. A gun, a knife, anything that could harm you. Attention funnels toward the threat. This makes sense evolutionarily. Tracking the danger is more important than remembering the attacker's face. Your brain is trying to keep you alive, not gather evidence. But this creates a massive problem for witness testimony. After a violent crime, witnesses often can't describe the perpetrator. They saw the weapon clearly. The rest is hazy. Height, build, facial features, clothing, all of it processed poorly because attention was elsewhere. Yet they're asked to identify a suspect. And because memory fills gaps, they might create details that weren't actually encoded. The brain constructs a face to go with the weapon. And that constructed face feels real. Studies confirm this repeatedly. Show people a video of a crime. In one version, the perpetrator holds a gun. In another, they hold a neutral object. People who see the gun remember the weapon in detail. People who see the neutral object remember the person better. The weapon doesn't just distract, it erases. This applies beyond weapons. Anything threatening or unusual pulls focus. A sudden movement, a loud sound, blood. The brain locks onto it. Peripheral details vanish. A witness might remember a stabbing in vivid detail, but have no memory of the attacker's face. Not because they weren't looking, because their brain wasn't encoding it. Courtrooms don't account for this. A witness is asked to identify the attacker. They pick someone from a lineup. The jury assumes the witness saw the person clearly. They didn't. They saw the weapon. The person was background noise. But the brain filled in a face anyway. And now that filled-in face is evidence. Even trained professionals experience this. Police officers in shootings often can't describe the shooter accurately. They remember the gun. The rest is vague. Training helps, but it doesn't eliminate the effect. The brain's threat response overrides conscious control. The worst part is how confident witnesses feel. They remember the event intensely. The fear, the shock, the weapon. That intensity makes them believe they remember everything. But intensity isn't accuracy. The weapon focus effect ensures that the thing they remember least is the thing they're asked about most, the person's identity. Attention is selective, and when a weapon is present, it selects the weapon. Everything else becomes optional, including the details that matter most for justice. Misattribution. You meet someone at a party. Later, you feel uneasy around them. You don't know why. Something about them makes you uncomfortable. You assume it's instinct, a gut feeling. Maybe they're untrustworthy. Maybe there's something off about their personality. You start avoiding them. You tell others you don't like them. You're certain there's a reason. There isn't. The unease isn't about them. It's about where you met them. The party was loud, crowded, stressful. You felt anxious. That anxiety got encoded with the memory of meeting this person. Now, every time you see them, the anxiety resurfaces. Your brain attributes the feeling to them, not to the context. You misattributed an emotion. Misattribution. When your brain assigns a feeling or memory to the wrong source. The emotion is real, the cause isn't. Your brain experiences something, anger, fear, attraction, and connects it to whatever is present at the time, even if that thing didn't cause the emotion. This happens constantly with attraction. You meet someone on a shaky bridge, during a suspenseful movie, after a workout. Your heart is racing. Your brain interprets the physiological arousal as attraction. It's not. It's adrenaline. But your brain misattributes the elevated heart rate to the person in front of you. You think you're attracted to them. You might not be. You're just associating them with the arousal you were already experiencing. Advertising exploits this. A commercial pairs a product with exciting music, beautiful imagery, feelings of joy or adventure. Your brain experiences positive emotions while watching. Later, when you see the product, those emotions resurface. You feel good about it. You want it. Not because the product is good, because your brain misattributed the emotions from the ad to the product itself. Relationships fall apart over this. You argue with your partner. Later, you see them and feel anger. You assume the anger is about them. It might not be. You might still be carrying residual frustration from work, traffic, something unrelated. But because they're in front of you when the anger surfaces, your brain tags them as the cause. Over time, this builds resentment. You start associating your partner with negative emotions that have nothing to do with them. Dreams create misattribution too. You dream about someone doing something hurtful. You wake up angry at them. The anger is real, but the event wasn't. Your brain experienced the emotion during the dream and attributed it to the person. Now, even though nothing happened, you feel wronged. The misattribution lingers, sometimes for days. Therapy can accidentally create this. A patient explores past trauma. They feel intense emotion during the session. The therapist is present during that emotional experience. Later, the patient might misattribute some of their distress to the therapist, not because the therapist caused it, but because the therapist was there when the emotion was activated. The brain connects the two. Misattribution doesn't just affect emotions. It affects memory sourcing. You remember a fact, but you can't remember where you learned it. Your brain guesses, attributes it to a trusted source. You repeat the fact as if it came from that source didn't. Your brain misattributed the memory's origin, and now you're confidently wrong about where the information came from. The problem is invisibility. You don't feel like you're misattributing. You feel like you're correctly identifying the source of your emotion or memory. The brain's guess feels like knowledge, and there's no signal telling you it's wrong. You're certain the person makes you uncomfortable. You're certain you're attracted. You're certain you learned it from a credible source. But certainty is not accuracy. It's just confidence in a guess. Your brain constantly attributes feelings and memories to sources, and it's wrong more often than you think. Confabulation. A patient wakes up in the hospital, brain damage, memory problems. The doctor asks what they did yesterday. The patient answers confidently. They went to the park, fed the ducks, had lunch with a friend. The details are vivid, specific. The doctor checks the record. The patient didn't leave the hospital. None of it happened. The patient isn't lying. They genuinely remember it. Their brain created the story to fill the gap. Confabulation. When the brain fabricates memories to cover for missing information. Not lying, not delusion. The person believes what they're saying. They're experiencing it as memory. But it's invention. Brain injury causes this most obviously. Damage to certain regions disrupts memory formation. The person can't recall what actually happened. But when asked, their brain doesn't say, "I don't know." It generates an answer, pulls from fragments, past experiences, plausible scenarios, stitches together a narrative. The person reports it as fact. They have no awareness it's false. But confabulation isn't limited to brain damage. Healthy brains do this too, subtly, constantly. Anytime there's a gap in memory, the brain fills it. You don't remember what you had for lunch last Tuesday. If someone asks, you might say you had a sandwich. Did you? Maybe. Or maybe your brain just picked a plausible answer based on what you usually eat. You're confabulating, just less dramatically than the brain-damaged patient. Therapy can trigger this. A patient is asked about childhood. They don't remember much. The therapist asks specific questions. Did you feel safe at home? The patient searches their memory, finds fragments, a vague sense of unease. The brain builds a story around it. Creates scenes, conversations, events. The patient reports these as memories. They're not. They're confabulations constructed to answer the therapist's questions. Children confabulate frequently. Ask a child what happened at school. They'll tell you a story, some of it true, some invented. They can't always distinguish between what happened and what they imagined or wished happened. The brain fills gaps, adds details, makes the story coherent. The child believes the whole thing. Adults do the same, just with more sophistication. Interrogations exploit this. A suspect is questioned for hours, exhausted, confused. They start filling in blanks. The interrogator suggests scenarios. The suspect's brain, desperate to resolve the inconsistency, adopts those scenarios, builds them into memory, confabulates a confession. They're not lying. They've genuinely created a memory of committing the crime, even if they didn't. Everyday confabulation is harder to spot. You tell a story from your past. Add a detail you're not sure about. The detail makes the story better, more complete. Repeat the story. Each time, the detail solidifies. Eventually, you remember it as fact. You confabulated once. Now it's embedded. The brain abhors gaps. When it doesn't have information, it invents. And it does this so seamlessly that you never notice the invention. It all feels like memory. The fabricated parts and the real parts are indistinguishable. Both come with the same sense of certainty. Both feel true. Confabulation isn't a sign of dishonesty. It's a sign that memory is constructive. Your brain builds narratives. And when pieces are missing, it improvises. The improvisation becomes memory. And you have no way of knowing which parts are real and which parts your brain made up to fill the silence. Prospective memory. You need to pick up groceries on the way home. You remind yourself multiple times. Don't forget. Stop at the store. It's you leave work. Drive home. Walk through the door. Realize you forgot. Again, you didn't forget what you needed to do. You forgot to remember to do it. Prospective memory. Remembering to perform an action in the future, not recalling the past, planning the present. It's the memory system that handles intentions, and it fails constantly. There are two types, time-based and event-based. Time-based means remembering to do something at a specific time. Call someone at noon. Take medication at 8. Event-based means remembering to do something when a certain condition is met. Mail a letter when you pass the post office. Mention something to a colleague when you see them. Both types fail. Often. The problem is attention. Prospective memory requires you to hold an intention while doing something else. You're driving, working, talking. Your brain is occupied. The intention sits in the background. When the time or event arrives, your brain is supposed to surface the intention. Bring it to the front. Make you act. But if you're too absorbed in what you're currently doing, the signal gets missed. The intention stays buried. You drive past the store. Miss the appointment. Forget to send the message. Age makes this worse. Older adults struggle more with time-based prospective memory. The internal clock that's supposed to trigger the reminder weakens. They know they need to do something. They forget when. Event-based prospective memory holds up better. The external cue, seeing the post office, encountering the person helps. But even that's not foolproof. Stress and cognitive load kill prospective memory. When your mind is full, intentions get crowded out. You're managing a crisis at work. Someone asks you to do something later. You agree. Later comes. You don't remember. Your brain was too overloaded to flag the reminder. The intention was recorded, but the retrieval cue never fired. Technology tries to compensate. Alarms, calendar notifications. To-do apps. These offload prospective memory to external systems. They work, but they also create dependency. The more you rely on reminders, the less your brain practices holding intentions. Your natural prospective memory weakens. You become unable to remember anything without a notification. Social consequences compound. You promise to call someone. Forget. They think you don't care. You meant to follow up on a work task. Forgot. Your reliability is questioned. Prospective memory failures look like negligence. But they're not. They're cognitive. Your brain failed to surface the intention at the right moment. The intention was there. The retrieval wasn't. Ironically, the harder you try, the worse it gets. You tell yourself not to forget, repeat it mentally. This creates pressure. Pressure increases cognitive load. Cognitive load interferes with the very mechanism you're trying to strengthen. You forget specifically because you were trying so hard not to. The only reliable fix is external cues. Write it down. Set an alarm. Put the thing you need to remember in a place you'll encounter. Don't trust your brain to surface the intention when needed. It won't. Not consistently. Prospective memory is fragile. And the more you ask of it, the more it fails. You'll forget to remember. It's not a character flaw. It's a design limitation. Tip of the tongue phenomenon. You're talking. A word is right there. You can feel it. You know the meaning. You know it starts with a certain letter. You can almost hear it. But it won't come. You pause. Struggle. The word hovers just out of reach. The more you try, the worse it gets. Then minutes later, when you've stopped trying, it appears. Perfectly clear. Like it was never stuck at all. Tip of the tongue. When you know a word but can't retrieve it. The knowledge is intact. The access is blocked. Your brain has the information. It just can't pull it up. This happens because of how words are stored. Meaning and sound are encoded separately. When you try to recall a word, your brain retrieves the meaning first. You know what you want to say. But retrieving the sound, the actual word form, requires a second step. Sometimes that step fails. The meaning is active. The word itself is stuck. Partial retrieval makes it worse. You remember fragments, the first letter, the number of syllables, words that sound similar. Your brain keeps offering these fragments, hoping one will trigger the full word. But the fragments don't help, they interfere. They block the actual target. The more partial information your brain provides, the harder it becomes to access the complete word. Age increases frequency. Older adults experience this more often. Not because their vocabulary is weaker, because the retrieval pathway is less efficient. The word is there. The connection to it has weakened. Younger people get it too, but less frequently. It's a retrieval problem, not a knowledge problem. Proper nouns are especially vulnerable. Names of people, places, movies. You know exactly who you're talking about. You can describe them. But the name won't surface. This happens because proper nouns are arbitrary. There's no meaning-based cue to help retrieval. Common nouns have semantic links. Proper nouns are just labels. If the label doesn't come, there's nothing else to grab onto. The frustration amplifies the block. You're aware the word is missing. You focus on it. That focus creates interference. Your brain is trying too hard. The retrieval pathway tenses. What should be automatic becomes effortful. And effort, paradoxically, makes retrieval harder. The word usually comes back when you stop trying. You move on. Start talking about something else. Relax. Suddenly the word appears. This happens because you stopped interfering. The retrieval pathway, no longer under pressure, completes on its own. The word was always accessible. You just had to stop blocking yourself from reaching it. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all. You give up. Use a different word. Move on. Hours later, the original word pops into your head. Unbidden. Perfectly clear. Your brain kept searching in the background. It found the word when you weren't paying attention, and delivered it when you no longer needed it. Tip of the tongue is maddening because the word is so close. You're not forgetting, you're failing to retrieve, and the harder you try, the more elusive it becomes. The word exists, your brain knows it, but knowing isn't accessing, and access, when it fails, can't be forced. You know the word, you just can't find it, and trying won't help. Retrieval-induced forgetting. You're studying for an exam, reviewing the material. Some facts you go over multiple times, other facts you skip. The ones you practiced, sharp, clear, ready. The ones you didn't, gone. Not because you never learned them, because practicing the others pushed them out. Retrieval-induced forgetting. When remembering some things makes you forget related things. The act of pulling up certain memories weakens others, not random memories. Specifically the ones connected to what you're retrieving. Remembering competes. And competition has losers. Your brain organizes information in networks. Related concepts cluster together. When you retrieve one item from that cluster, your brain has to suppress the others to focus. That suppression isn't temporary. It weakens those competing memories. The more you retrieve the target memory, the more you damage the related ones. What you practice gets stronger. What gets suppressed gets weaker. Eventually, it disappears. This happens in studying constantly. You review certain chapters. Those chapters become solid. But related material you didn't review, it fades. Not because you forgot to study it, because studying other parts of the same topic actively suppressed it. You made yourself forget by trying to remember. Witnesses experience this during repeated questioning. Police ask about certain details. The witness recalls those details over and over. Gets better at remembering them. But other details, the ones not asked about, weaken. By the time the witness testifies, they remember the question details perfectly. Everything else is vague. The interrogation didn't just strengthen some memories, it erased others. Therapy does this unintentionally. A patient repeatedly discusses specific traumatic events. Those events become vivid, but other memories from the same period fade. Not because they're less important, because the brain suppressed them to keep the focus clear. The patient ends up with a distorted picture of their past. Some parts hyper-detailed, others blank. Relationships decay this way. You argue with someone, replay the argument in your head. The hurtful things they said get reinforced, the good moments suppressed. Every time you recall the fight, you're weakening the positive memories. Over time, all you remember is conflict. The happy memories didn't disappear on their own. Retrieval-induced forgetting erased them. Even reading does this. You read an article. It mentions several points. You focus on one, think about it. Discuss it. That point becomes locked in. The other points, gone. Not because you didn't read them. Because retrieving the one you focused on suppressed the rest. The brain can't hold everything at once. When you remember, you're choosing what survives. And that choice, whether conscious or not, determines what gets forgotten. Retrieval doesn't preserve, it destroys. Selectively. And the more you remember certain things, the more you guarantee you'll forget others. Directed forgetting. Someone tells you to forget something. Erase it, don't think about it. So you try, push it out of your mind, focus on something else, and it works. Sort of. The memory weakens. Becomes harder to access. You genuinely forgot at least partially because you were told to. Directed forgetting. When an instruction to forget actually makes forgetting more likely. You're not passively losing the memory. You're actively suppressing it, and suppression, when done deliberately, can reduce a memory's strength. The mechanism involves attention. When told to forget, your brain stops rehearsing that information. Stops integrating it with other memories. Treats it as irrelevant. Without rehearsal, the memory doesn't consolidate properly. It stays fragile, accessible in the short term, but unlikely to survive long-term storage. This works in experiments. People are shown a list of words. After some words, they're told to remember them. After others, told to forget. Later, when tested, they recall the remember words better. The forget words are harder to retrieve, not because they were never encoded. Because the instruction to forget disrupted consolidation, the memory exists, but weakly. Students use this accidentally. After an exam, they try to forget the material, move on. The brain complies, stops reinforcing those memories. Weeks later, they can't recall what they studied. Not because the information decayed naturally, because they actively stopped maintaining it. Trauma survivors attempt this deliberately, trying to forget painful events, avoiding reminders, suppressing thoughts. Sometimes it works. The memories become less intrusive, less detailed, but it's not erasure, it's suppression. The memory still exists, just harder to access. And when it does surface, often triggered unexpectedly, it can feel more intense because it hasn't been processed. Directed forgetting has limits. You can weaken a memory by trying to forget, but you can't delete it. The instruction to forget reduces rehearsal. That reduces consolidation, but the initial encoding remains. If something triggers the memory strongly enough, it comes back. Often vividly, the suppression was temporary. Ironically, trying too hard to forget can backfire. The effort itself requires thinking about the thing you're trying to forget. That thinking, even in the context of suppression, reinforces the memory. The harder you try to push it away, the more attention you give it, and attention strengthens encoding. Relationships use this destructively. After a breakup, people try to forget their ex. Avoid reminders, suppress thoughts. It works partially. The memories weaken, but they don't disappear. And when something brings them back, the emotions return too. Because directed forgetting doesn't erase feeling, it just buries it. The brain can follow instructions to forget, but only up to a point. Suppression works. Deletion doesn't. And the line between forgetting and merely hiding is thinner than you think. Infantile amnesia. Why don't you remember being born, or your first year, or most of your second? Everyone has infantile amnesia, the inability to recall events from early infancy. It's not that nothing happened. It's that your brain couldn't store it in a way you can retrieve now. The explanation isn't fully settled, but the leading theory involves brain development. The hippocampus, the region critical for forming long-term memories, isn't fully developed in infants. It's growing, changing, forming new neurons at a rapid rate. That growth is good for learning basic skills, but it disrupts stable memory storage. Memories formed during this period don't consolidate properly. They're encoded, but not in a format your adult brain can decode. Language plays a role too. Before you had words, you experienced the world differently. Your memories from that time, if they exist at all, aren't verbal. They're sensory-emotional fragmented. When you try to recall them now, your brain searches for narrative structure. It doesn't find any. The memories aren't lost. They're incompatible with your current retrieval system. Some people claim to remember infancy, vivid, detailed memories from before age 2. Almost certainly false. Not lies, confabulations. Stories built from photos. Family anecdotes, imagination. The brain fills in the gap where memory should be. Creates a plausible narrative. The person believes they remember, but they're remembering the story, not the event. Infantile amnesia isn't total. Implicit memories form. You learn to walk, recognize faces, respond to voices. Those skills stay. But explicit memories, the kind you can consciously recall, don't. The mechanisms are separate. Skills don't require the hippocampus to store. Explicit memories do, and the infant hippocampus isn't ready. This has legal implications. Young children are sometimes asked to testify about events from early childhood. Courts assume they can remember. But if the event happened before age 3, the memory is almost certainly reconstructed, not from direct recall, from suggestions, photos, repeated questioning. The child genuinely believes they remember. The memory feels real, it's not. Therapy sometimes tries to recover infant memories. Patients are guided to access their earliest experiences. What emerges is rarely reliable. The brain is creating, not retrieving. Infantile amnesia is a biological barrier. You can't remember what was never stored in a retrievable format. The cutoff isn't sharp. Some people remember fragments from age 2 or 3. Most don't remember anything before 3 or 4. A few retain scattered images from earlier. But detailed, narrative memories before age 3, those don't exist. If you think you have them, you're remembering something else. A reconstruction, a story, not the original experience. Your earliest years shaped you, but you can't access them. The memories are gotten, not forgotten, never truly formed. Childhood amnesia. You remember high school clearly, middle school mostly, elementary school fragments, kindergarten almost nothing, and before that, blank. Childhood amnesia. The gradual loss of memories from early childhood, not a sharp cut-off like infantile amnesia, a slow fade. Most people's earliest clear memory is from around age 3 or 4. Before that, things get hazy. You might remember a specific moment, a birthday party, a trip, but the context is gone. The everyday details vanished. You remember highlights, if anything. Everything else eroded. This happens partly because of how children encode memories. Young children focus on sensory and emotional details, not narrative structure. They experience events without the self-reflective framework adults use. The memory exists, but it's encoded differently. As you age, your retrieval system expects narrative. It can't decode the fragments stored in a child's format. Language development matters. As your language skills grew, you started encoding memories verbally. Early memories, formed before you had complex language, aren't tagged with words. They're sensory, visual, emotional. Your adult brain searches for verbal cues. Finds nothing. The memory is there, but inaccessible. Neurological changes accelerate the fade. Your brain reorganizes during childhood. Neural connections that were strong early on weaken. New pathways form. Memories stored in the old structure become harder to access. Not deleted. Buried under new architecture. Social reinforcement helps some memories survive. Events your family talks about. Stories repeated at gatherings. These get re-encoded every time they're discussed. The original memory might be gone, but the story persists. You remember the retelling, not the event. This creates false confidence. You think you remember childhood. Often, you're remembering the stories about childhood. Childhood amnesia isn't uniform. Emotional events stick better. Traumatic or highly positive experiences resist the fade. But mundane daily life, gone. You don't remember most of what happened. Even years you think you recall are sparse. A few anchored events, the rest is blank. This makes childhood testimony unreliable. A child testifies about something that happened years earlier. Are they remembering the event? Or the story they've been told about it? Or the questions they've been asked? The memory could be any of these, or a blend, and the child can't tell the difference. Photographs distort this further. You see a photo from childhood. Assume you remember the moment. You don't. You remember the photo. Your brain fills in details around it, creates a scene. That scene feels like memory. It's fabrication. Childhood amnesia is normal, expected. Everyone loses early memories, but the loss is gradual enough that you don't notice. You assume what you remember is most of it. It's not, it's a fraction. The rest is gone. Overwritten by growth, language, time, and the brain's relentless restructuring. Reminiscence bump. Ask someone in their 60s to recall their life. They'll remember recent years. They'll remember childhood fragments. But the memories that dominate, the most vivid and numerous, come from one specific period, late teens to early 30s. That stretch gets remembered better than any other, not because more happened. Because of when it happened. Reminiscence bump. The disproportionate number of memories from late adolescence and early adulthood. Decades later, those years remain unusually clear. Other periods fade normally, but this window, sticky, persistent, overrepresented. Why? First experiences. Your late teens and 20s are packed with firsts. First love, first job, first apartment, first major decisions. Firsts are encoded more strongly because they're novel. Your brain marks them as significant. They become reference points. Later experiences of the same type, getting another job, another relationship, don't stand out as much. They blend. The first stay sharp. Identity formation happens then. You're figuring out who you are. Every decision feels monumental. That emotional weight makes memories stick. You remember the things that shaped your sense of self. And most of that shaping happens in your 20s. Neurologically, your brain is still highly plastic during this period. You're past the chaotic growth of childhood, but not yet into the slower consolidation of middle age. Memory formation is at its peak efficiency. What gets encoded during this window is encoded well. Cultural reinforcement plays a role. Music, movies, fashion from your late teens and 20s become your reference points. You encounter them repeatedly throughout life. Each encounter reactivates the memory, reconsolidates it, keeps it strong. The songs from when you were 40, less reinforcement, they fade faster. The reminiscence bump isn't universal. It depends on your life trajectory. Someone whose 20s were uneventful but whose 40s were transformative might have a shifted bump. But for most people, late teens to early 30s is the golden period. The years that refuse to fade. This creates a distortion. Older adults think their youth was more eventful, more significant than other periods. It wasn't necessarily. It just gets remembered better. The bump makes those years feel like the core of your life. Everything else prelude or aftermath. Advertising targets this. Nostalgia marketing aims at the reminiscence bump. Play a song from someone's 20s. Show them products from that era. The emotional response is strong. Not because those things were objectively better, because they're tied to the period you remember most clearly. The bump makes them feel more meaningful than they were. The bump also affects how you see yourself. Your identity crystallized during that period. And because you remember it so well, you assume that's who you really are. The person you became later, less certain, less defined. The reminiscence bump locks you into a version of yourself from decades ago and keeps you there.